Hello everybody, and welcome to Lecture 7. We're going to talk sociological understanding of an emotion, and in fact there's an assignment embedded kind of towards the end of this lecture. So that's what we're going to lead up to. Let us get started. As a social psychologist, I will admit one thing, that the dividing line between sociology and social psychology is a fuzzy one at best. So we've got to kind of have a foot in each domain here without necessarily differentiating them completely. So what do we know then? Emotions to sociologists, they're more interested in emotion as a product or an experience of social relations. Certainly that would be true of social psychologists as well. Experience expressed within the context of social structures. And when we start talking social structures, this is where we kind of are moving more to the sociological perspective. Recall the importance of emotion to governance as expressed by Aristotle and by Hobbes. Remember, Hobbes said that fear is kind of the prime mover, or what keeps people in check. And Aristotle talked about power structures. Who else talked about power, but really kind of as an individual reaction basis to the acquisition of power or the loss of power? Anyone? Represented by one of our philosophical action figures. Yeah, if you've got Spinoza coming out your mouth now, right on, nicely done. So recall the emotion, the relationship of emotion to social ethical decision making is discussed by Hume and Kant, and kind of the higher order thinking there. Not until the mid-70s did emotion become part of the sociologist exploration or explanatory toolkit. For the most part, you find exceptions to that, so don't take it too far. Sociological theories of emotion are diverse. Like social psychology, a definition of sociology, tough to pin down, right? And there's such a wide variety of methodology, right? Theory and perspectives that make it even more difficult to pin down. In sociology, though, patterns of expression are important across societies and cultures. Expect the same for emotion when sociologists go to tackle ideas related to emotion. Many of the cross-cultural comparisons, there's many of these to explore, and that exploration continues to this day. An aside on cross-cultural psychology, when I took my comprehensive exam, our candidacy exam, you have to take a candidacy exam when you get your master's, then you take the candidacy exam to go on to your PhD. One of the questions that they asked, and it was a horrible question, it was a take-home question, it was a good question, but it was, okay, so please kind of summarize where social psychology has been cross-culturally for the last 50 years. Explain the current state of cross-cultural research in social psychology, and then predict where social psychology will go in cross-cultural study in the next 50 years. Horrible question. Most of us were answering that question on the order of 35 to 50 pages of response. Don't you just want to really go after a PhD and take a candidacy exam to get there? That being said, it was informative, and it was a useful exercise. And who knows? Maybe they were using it to develop a cross-cultural psychology course. The components that would be included in a course like that based on our answers. You never know. So many of the cross-cultural comparisons explore power, right, as it relates to the emotional experience and expression, and that's basically what our assignment's going to be somewhat about. Politics and its relation to emotion. And God, we're in an election year. We are right now 30 days away from the election, give or take, 32 days. And emotions are running high, and emotion is being manipulated in an effort to get you to vote for one party or the other. So we got a fuzzy boundary. Sociologists, social psychologists get along pretty damn well together. Now, the two-factor theory of emotion, right? There are two factors to emotional experience suggested in this theory. So we start with a stimulus event, as you can see, and that stimulus event can cause physiological arousal, and William James would be cool with this because he'd say, yeah, I see a bear and I run, right? So a direct path from the stimulus to the physiological arousal. But the sociologists are also offering, at least some of them, that the stimulus event not only triggers a physiological arousal, but in fact triggers social and environmental influences, that is, associations with those. And then, based on what I'm feeling in terms of physiological arousal, and like I said, I'm going to start using this term, this affective flux, right? That this change in my affective state, right? The social and environmental influences, that is the context, right? And the change in affective stream combined then lead to this emotional experience. So you can see why it's called the two-factor theory, because it's taking the physiological arousal, but the context in which it occurs, and then generating the emotional experience. Wow. Let's hold on to that, and when you're developing your theory of emotion towards the end of the course, you might want to consider that strongly as a possible component of emotional experience. So emotional state, then, just summarizing, begins with this general arousal of the sympathetic nervous system, and we talked about, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems in 6.2, and it's coincidence or followed by the cognitive appraisal. So it can occur, or maybe the cognitive appraisal trails slightly behind, physiological arousal being largely a non-consciously instigated process, and the cognitive appraisal may have a conscious element, so it slows that process down a little bit. But how on earth would you provide evidence for this? I mean, what would have to happen? You notice the cats are going crazy here. What are you doing, Proton? It's windy today. I get some of the windows open, and so that just makes the cats crazy. It like vibrates their little noggins, and they get all energized about it. Red electron is down here, up to something bad, I'm sure. So, yeah, that's electron, and there's proton back there. So, and here comes their sister Penelope to make more trouble. Let us then talk about this classic misattribution experimental paradigm. And this is a biggie, right? Schachter and Singer, what did they do? They injected participants with epinephrine, a stimulant. Right? So this is to create the arousal, the physiological arousal. The participants experienced sympathetic nervous system arousal as a result of the injection. That was the intent. Participants were paired with a confederate who either acted happy or angry while they were with the participant, so that was randomly assigned to that condition. Then participants' emotional states mirrored the confederates to which they were assigned. Notice, the arousal then was explained in terms of the context, that is the partner they were paired with. So, pretty good demonstration of the two factors influencing it. But the effects were diminished when the participants were informed of the nature of the injection. So we're going to give you the shot and it's going to arouse you. Now they have a reason for the arousal, the injection. So they were able to disregard the context, that is, the attitude, the behavior of their confederate partner. They effectively separated this. This is a classic study. This is a big time Schachter and Singer. In the condition they were able to attribute the arousal to the injection, then they didn't need to have the emotional response. There was no need to explain the response anymore, the physiological response in terms of an emotion label. So two-factor theory mechanics, physiological arousal, unexplained, change in the affective stream, and in this case we're saying the affective stream is jacking up, it's becoming more intense, right? Will prompt a search for the cause. Why am I activated? What is causing this? If an adequate causal explanation is available, the emotion label will be consistent with the explanation and the appraisal process will be terminated. Wow. So now what we're saying is this is a decidedly different approach to the arousal of emotion. There is no technical arousal of emotion. There's just arousal, physiological change in the affective stream. Emotion is not something that erupts. Emotion is a consequence. It's an explanation to this process. This is quite a bit different than we've been discussing, and this is kind of the first time we're laying this out in this context, especially empirically supported. Given a similar set of cognitive circumstances, the individual will experience and label the emotion to the extent the physiological arousal is present. So really what we're talking about is probably arousal first, right? And then emotion label assigned afterwards. So this model is not without criticisms, it's not without detractors, right? And that's what makes science so cool, because we're more than willing to say, I don't know if I buy this, what's your evidence? And then we start the conversation from there. So it appears that learning is required, that it's necessary for cognitive appraisal to take place. How do innate theories of emotion then, inborn kind of genetic legacies of emotion, square with this cognitive and this appraisal process? There's a tremendous disconnect there, but it opens some interesting doors down the road. So let us not, grieve the loss of innate emotions at this point. They may still exist. Replications by other researchers of the initial studies were not successful. And we've been going through the last 10 years in social psychology this period of time called the replication crisis, when many old studies are being revisited and they fail to replicate, and now people are questioning, well, why don't they replicate? Does the phenomenon exist at all? That's a whole nother story and a whole nother discussion. So let us leave that to some other time. As we previously discussed, the single route to emotional experience is probably an oversimplification. So while emotions might be innate, there may be more to it than that in most contexts. We'll see. So arousal is only half the story. The parasympathetic nervous system, as we discussed last time, right, reduces arousal. How the hell does that work within the two-factor model? Are we saying then, and this is just conjecture, supposition, a possibility, that as the parasympathetic takes over, my arousal reduces, that is, the affective stream starts taking a dip, right, to lower intensity. Do I again then appraise the context and explain that parasympathetic activation in terms of a different emotion than was applied in the increase phase due to the sympathetic nervous system? Notice when we start talking about the parasympathetic in this context, it seems to be first and foremost less adaptive. We're not necessarily responding to anything. We're relaxing post-response to something that was activating. It becomes more complicated in this regard. We see a couple things that happen in emotion research, that negative emotions take precedence in the researcher's mind. They're more often these negative arousing emotions, if you're willing to take the negative positive terms, which we discussed last time. If you're willing to go with that, notice that the negative arousing emotions generally gain more research interest, and more work is done theoretically to explain them. Now, but what we've done at this point is open the door to the importance of context. That is, this arousal is occurring, it occurs within a context, if we want to go there, and the appraisal process is then making us understand the nature of the activation according to the context. Wow. These cats are berserk. So let's go to this dramaturgical theory of emotion. And now, one of my favorite sociologists, if it's possible to have a favorite sociologist, Goffman, right? And we're going to look at the social interaction as akin to play. We're actors, right, in a play. And think about this. Shakespeare had already said this. All the world's a stage, and we're merely players in that performance. And this is kind of an old idea, but what Goffman is now taking it and running with it is saying we're all actors, right? And so we behave from cultural scripts, and these cultural scripts allow us certain options and then foreclose other options in the roles we play and the behaviors we can demonstrate within this act we're going to call life. So we seek to find out about others quickly in interactions so that we can define the situation, know the other actor's expectations, right? So the context, what does it expect, so we can enact the appropriate script and not mess up and do our performance well, right? Ultimately, we want to create the correct impression. So what we're saying now is that emotion is highly defined by context, it's highly defined by role, and it's highly defined by expectations, or it might be facilitated by expectation or inhibited by expectation. And I think it's important to use those two words as we move towards our assignment. So we're able to engage in the appropriate emotion and interactional displays to the extent that we understand the expectations, our role, and the unfolding context. So we search for any and all evidence to facilitate this process. Now, I'm going to get to this issue of emotional intelligence, and some of you are going to want to do the emotional intelligence paper. Notice there's a lot being said about emotional intelligence throughout this course. Sometimes I'm explicit about it, sometimes it's just implied, but to the extent that I can read the room, if we want to use that cliche, I'm more likely to then enact the appropriate behaviors, right, and create the impression I desire to create. This is a facet of emotional intelligence. Now, interactional evidence, we observe behaviors, especially nonverbal behaviors, and this is really important. If you are listening to words and you're observing nonverbal behavior and they don't match up, which one should you give priority to in terms of evidence? And you should always go with the nonverbals, right? And when we talked about reading facial expressions in the previous lecture, when we talked about micro expressions, remember that people have the potential, that is non-consciously, the expression begins to erupt, but a little bit later, 1/10 of a second later, conscious control, inhibitory process gets implemented and then remove that expression. So again, it's sensitivity to context. Other things are harder to mask, maybe tone of voice, right? So facial expressions we can mask. Nonverbal behaviors, tone of voice, much more difficult to mask. Not that there aren't people who can't do it and do it very well, but it's more difficult, right? So all of this is in order to move past polite surface elements. So if I'm able to attend to nonverbal behaviors, I'm able to attend to tone of voice, right? Then this polite structure that's imposed upon us, I might be able to look past it and see what's really going on, if there's some underlying mismatch from what society dictates as acceptable to what the actor I'm observing is actually feeling and doing. So all this is an attempt to discern underlying thoughts and emotions. And note, you've probably experienced this. When we're not sure, we feel our gaze on the other becoming more intense. We're searching for cues to either support our hypotheses about what's going on with them, right, or to refute those hypotheses as we detect mismatch. So Goffman's face work then is, as we discern the truth underlying our observation, as Goffman suggests, we align encounters where a circular flow of feeling and that we begin to match, imitate, mimic each other's feelings, right, as we begin to understand where the person's coming from. Now this is what Goffman terms as an interaction ritual. And Goffman has written a lot of books and developed a lot of vocabulary around this. So the interaction ritual is what we've learned from our culture, from society, that dictates our behavior with another, right? If we violate the terms of the interaction ritual, then we may be deemed as deviant. And note, we see this in some people that they just don't seem to get the memo, right? And they behave awkwardly, or they behave in a manner that's inappropriate to what we would expect. And hence, they earn the label deviant in that regard. Deviant acts require repair or realignment through a process of face work where one makes the attempt to present oneself more favorably. So I messed it up. I said the wrong thing. I came on too strong for the context. My emotion was inappropriate. Maybe there's something I didn't understand. And now I've got to make it up. I've got to realign with the context and with the people with whom I'm interacting. So if the deviant act is by another, though, we can participate in creating the space where they can undo their violation, right, their deviant act, and engage in what's called restorative face work. So sometimes someone says something inappropriate and we cut them some slack. Maybe we love them, that we're close to them, and we say, whoa, wait a second, did I get that right? You don't really mean that, do you? Or did you really mean to say that way? That is what we're doing, is communicating. You effed up. Do you want to own it and now back off of it? But I know often in this day and age, we live in the world of double down, and a lot of times we give people an opportunity to do the restorative face work, and they're damned certain that they will not, right? And they're just going to double down on the situation they're in. Let's talk about this restorative process in part 2.